Canada Aviation Museums by Province. Chapter 1. Canada Aviation Museums. Alberta Aviation Museum websites. acemc.ab.ca, Aerospace Museum, Calgary. AlbertaAviationMuseum.com, Alberta Aviation Museum, Edmonton. CAHF.ca, Canada's Aviation Hall of Fame, Wetaskiwin. Cold Lake Air Force Museum. BomberCommandMuseum.ca, Bomber Command Museum of Canada. TheMilitaryMuseums.ca/gallery-navy, Naval Museum of Alberta, Calgary. British Columbia Aviation Museum websites. bchem.net, British Columbia Aviation Museum, Sydney. CanadianFlight.org, Canadian Museum of Flight, Langley. Comox Air Force Museum.ca, Comox Air Force Museum, Lazo. SpaceCenter.ca, HR, Macmillan Space Centre, Vancouver. West Coast Museum of Flying, Sydney. Manitoba Aviation Museum websites. airmuseum.ca, Commonwealth Air Training Plan Museum, Brandon. Manitoba Military Aviation Museum.com, Manitoba Military Aviation Museum, Winnipeg. wcam.mb.ca, Western Canada Aviation Museum, Winnipeg. Newfoundland Aviation Museum websites. NAM.ca, North Atlantic Aviation Museum, Gander. Northwest Territories Aviation Museum websites. pwnhc.ca, Prince of Wales Northern Heritage Centre, Yellowknife. Nova Scotia Aviation Museum websites. acam.ednet.ns.ca, Atlantic Canada Aviation Museum, Bedford. gmam.ca, Greenwood Military Aviation Museum. Shearwater Aviation Museum.ns.ca, Shearwater Aviation Museum. Ontario Aviation Museum websites. cg.cfpsa.ca/cg-borden/en/facilities/pages/Borden Military Museum.aspx, base Borden Military Museum. billybishop.org, Billy, Bishop Heritage Museum, Owen Sound. aviation.technomuses.ca, Canada Aviation Museum, Ottawa. petawawa-museums.org/website/airborne/introduction.htm, Canadian Airborne Forces Museum, Petawawa. Bushplane.com, Canadian Bushplane Heritage Centre, Sault Ste. Marie. ch2a.ca, Canadian Historical Aircraft Association, Windsor. Warplane.com, Canadian Warplane Heritage Museum, Mt. Hope. classicaaircraft.ca/homepage.htm, Collingwood Classic Aircraft Foundation. kenflightmuseum.org, Gallery of Early Canadian Flight, Weehawken. greatwarflyingmuseum.com, Great War Flying Museum, Cheltenham. Memorial Military Museum, Campbellford. airforcemuseum.ca/n, Royal Canadian Air Force Memorial Museum, Trenton. commuseum.org/home.php, Toronto Aerospace Museum. Quebec Aviation Museum websites. Air Pioneers Museum, Ste. Marie de Beauce. Bagotvillemuseum.ca/en/index.php, Bagotville Air Defense Museum. Bush Aviation Museum, Grandes Piles. cahc-ccpa.com, Canadian Aviation Heritage Centre, Ste. Anne de Bellevue. Cosmodome.org, COSMODOME Space Science Centre, Laval. Aerovision.org, Quebec Air and Space Museum, Hubert. Vintagewings.ca, Vintage Wings of Canada, Gatineau. Saskatchewan Aviation Museum websites. wdm.ca/mj.html, Western Development Museum, Moose Jaw. Yukon Aviation Museum websites. goitm.ca, Yukon Transportation Museum, Whitehorse.